It's Friday, and welcome to another edition of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted. This is our podcast. I'm John. You're Jeremy. How you doing this week?
I'm good.
Good.
You have to excuse the rain in the background.
Yes, we got to talk louder. So you may want to turn your volume down. We're at a studio, and you may hear some rain in the background. So last week, we talked about the Republicans and could they blow it. This week, I want to talk about the Democrats because I just looked at some polling numbers, and they're troubling. There's actually a few polls. Emerson has one, and The Hill has one. There's in particular, though, our colleagues at Quinnipiac that have some troubling overall news. The president has been doing a little bit better, 42 to 45% in the polls. Quinnipiac, though, has him at 38%. And okay, and that stands there, a little bit of an outlier. But when I dug deeper into that Quinnipiac poll, these numbers were kind of staggering to me. First of all, the president's approval rating, all right, 38%, 83% among Democrats. You know that you got to get your own party. 30% approval among independents. Remember, Joe Biden won independents over Trump by 21 points, and here he's polling 30% approval. 34% approval among Latino voters. This is a group that gave him 67% of the vote, and that's generally been the average for Democrats. And then lastly, 58% among blacks. Another group where a Democrat not only expects, but really has to get 90% of the vote. So let's put that on the shelf and consider that that is national. Now, my focus then is on Georgia. We've got two really hot races there. We've got a U.S. Senate race and a gubernatorial race. So the incumbent, by virtue of a special election in 2020, Raphael Warnock, who squeezed in by 1% or so back then, is now actually behind by 5 points, actually 4 points, against Hershcel Walker. Also, fellow African-American Hershcel Walker, of course, the Heisman Trophy NFL superstar. And one might say, well, maybe the advantage of being a black candidate with a large black vote gets dissipated a little bit by running against another black candidate. But at the same time, if you look at the gubernatorial race, where odds look like the incumbent Brian Kemp, who does not have Donald Trump's support. Brian Kemp leading the Republican primary. But if you look at Brian Kemp as the hypothetical winner of the Republican primary against Stacey Abrams, who almost won against Kemp 4 years ago and has defined her career since then as enabling higher turnouts and voter registration among blacks, she is actually down by 5 percentage points against Kemp right now. A good bit of that, let's say, is that President Biden is only polling 32% approval rating in Georgia, a state that he won by a hair, but that he won nonetheless. But you also see some erosion in black support for both Abrams and Warnock. Any thoughts on what may be going on there?
Well, we've been building on this week after week.
Yes, we have.
And I don't want to repeat myself. I mean, we talked last week about inflation. We talked about crime. We talked about how the war in Ukraine, after all, had a brief moment of party unity. Mm-hmm. I think Americans, by and large, are still in support, but that party rift has reared its ugly head. I don't have any other polling data, because you've covered the gamut, but there was something interesting that happened. I think it was a week ago when Barack Obama was at the White House visiting. Did you see that footage?
I did, of course.
Yeah. I mean, that to me. So you gave the quantitative polling data. To me, that's the qualitative. That speaks volumes. Where for those who didn't see, Joe Biden is basically wandering around the room, and of course, Barack Obama walks into a room. He's going to get a lot of attention, but Joe Biden's the president. And there's footage of Biden basically as if he were like, the busboy or the janitor or the waiter. Nobody's paying attention to him. He goes over to Barack from behind, puts his hand on his shoulder. Obama's just ignoring him. It almost looks like the Democrats, and you see this in the data here. Are they ready to drop Biden? When 2024 comes along, I mean, so far it's just not. I know that's way down the road, and we've got the midterms, but to me, there's something more intuitive that footage speaks volumes. That he looks to be done within his own party. He looks to be possibly a liability to the Democrats. And we can go into that further, but I'll stop right there.
Good, because I disagree with you. Okay, first of all, it has to be earth-shattering for a party to drop its own presidential candidate or its own president.
Of course,
because in the most benign form, it's an admission we made a mistake or we don't like this guy. Now go back 10 years ago. And 12 years ago, to 2010 and then 2014, where Barack Obama lost almost record numbers of seats in the congressional elections. And I recall a situation in Kentucky where a woman who had been Attorney General, statewide Democrat, was running against Mitch McConnell. And it had actually been a competitive race. I don't remember her name, but I remember her face. And one of the things that did her in, turned out being a blowout, was she was asked by the editorial board of either the Louisville or the Lexington newspaper, did you vote for Barack Obama as president? And she said, I can't recall. That's deadly. That's deadly, obviously, for Obama, but it's deadly for a candidate who's looking for Democratic support to deny your own president. So in that sense, hope springs eternal. We're actually recording this on Thursday. Just an hour ago, the Senate, with some Republican support, backed Ketanji Brown Jackson as the Supreme Court justice. So there's a victory there. But you're right. I mean, unless inflation gets under control, unless Biden gets his mojo back, this could be troubling.
Make no mistake about it. And I understand it's not just the Democrats, it's the Republicans too. There's a lot of window dressing. There's a lot of putting lipstick on a pig. But because we're talking about the Democrats today.
Now let's be careful here. By lipstick on a pig, you're referring to
Joe Biden and the prospect for the Democratic Party putting their support behind Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And again, I repeat about the footage at the White House gathering. He was being ignored. Mm-hmm. And what does that say when? And again, I understand Barack. Well, I want to say Barack Obama's a rock star, but we had a poll back in December where we asked about a whole list of people who were heroic. Mm-hmm. Obama didn't even get 40%. Overall. And then among African Americans, 50% said he was heroic, 50% said he wasn't heroic. So this is not necessarily somebody who has amazing broad support, right? I mean, even his, I think, legacy is kind of dwindled a little bit, but he steals the show, and the President of the United States the so-called leader of the free world is wandering around being ignored, I can't help but think that Democrats are a little bit worried to be around this guy. And I mean, with everything going on, it was looking good maybe about 6 or 8 months ago for Build Back Better. It looked like maybe it was going to pass. He can't let go of that. He's still trying to ram that through, and it still doesn't look like it's going to get through. But the point well taken about Brown Jackson. It looks like she's going to get nominated the Supreme Court justice and take over for Breyer, but I don't think that is much of a bellwether for or signal of hope for the Democrats.
Okay, so in my lifetime, so we're going back to Garfield. Okay, no, in my lifetime, here is what I've seen. I've seen Lyndon Johnson win in a landslide, and then recognize his own toxicity, right, over the war in Vietnam. Saw Jimmy Carter serving one term. Jimmy Carter's hot now, but it's too late. But he is hot now. Historians are giving him a lot more credit for accomplishments. I saw Bill Clinton in 1994 after a crushing blow, losing, I recall, 62 seats and losing the House and the Senate. And remember Britt Hume, who was he was White House correspondent for ABC News, asking him at a news conference, is the presidency still relevant? And then 1 year later, well, a few months later, his bouncing back and then winning a decisive victory in 96. And then, of course, we saw Barack Obama as well, not doing so hot in the polls and losing record numbers of seats, and then bouncing back. Had Obama or Clinton, frankly, been able to run for a third term, I think they would have been elected. Biden, on the negative side, obviously doesn't have the electricity that Clinton and Obama had. On the other hand, there's a sense of a steady hand, and a sense, I think anyway, if you let Joe be Joe. He's not the fellow who's going to light up the room. He's the fellow, on the other hand, who gives you a sense of calmness and steadiness. And I think ultimately Republicans are going to have to show that it's not only that life is not so good right now, but Republicans are going to have to show, well, we can do better than this. And right now, I think we both agree Republicans aren't particularly showing that.
Yeah, I mean, and as we're talking, a hard rain is going to fall as we talk about the Democrats. It got louder.
It did.
Is that a sign from the gods? I don't know. But no, you're right. I mean, regarding the Republicans, will Ron DeSantis emerge? Will he take over Donald Trump? It's yet to be seen. It's a big toss-up for the Republicans. Joe Biden is going to be 80 years old in the fall. It's not to say that you can't have a chief executive in the White House with that kind of age. You can, but the presidency, as we have watched, ages people dramatically. I mean, Clinton, W. Bush, even Obama, who was very young. This is a guy who achieved the presidency at age 79. He's going to be very old in a couple of years. So I'm looking to see what's going to happen. The midterms are going to say a lot. But as we've said before, still to this day, as it was last week, right now it's in the pocket for the Republicans taking back the House.
So as we move along through the year, we have talked about so far Pennsylvania, Ohio, Missouri. We did talk about Wisconsin and Georgia. So we've talked about 5 of the top 10. Oh, you know what? We did talk about Nevada as well. So that's 6, and Arizona. So, all right. So we've been doing fairly well. As things develop, it's still a little early. We're going to talk about some House races.
Yeah.
as well. And that's obviously not all politics is local. It really isn't. There is generally a national theme or message that emerges. And right now, that's not playing well for Democrats.
I'll say one other thing, and then you can chime in too. But still on the topic of Biden and things not looking good for him, and then also getting back to Ukraine. There was a hard push over the last couple weeks to assign the problem of the prices at the pump going up to Putin. But we know that Americans don't attribute it to Putin, that this was happening before. So, the taking the problems that we're facing in the economy and single-handedly putting it, against the foreign adversary seems to not be in his best interest. That is Biden's best interest. How will he pivot from that? How will he reemerge from that? What can he do? I'm curious to see.
I am too. In many respects, some of the problems appear to be intractable. I'll tell you what makes me very uncomfortable, and Obama had made this mistake in Syria, drawing that line in the sand. When I hear Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, when I hear the president saying they will pay and they will pay and Putin will pay, how? The American people do not want to go to war.
No.
Therefore, we will not go to war.
Yeah.
Now, we've had presidents who've manipulated us into war. LBJ certainly did. George W. certainly did. And that's not all. But in this instance, the message is loud and clear, particularly with, the complete and utter failures of Iraq and Afghanistan. And frankly, we still are very much in the post-Vietnam era as well.
Yeah.
So got to be very careful of that line in the sand stuff.
Yeah, and there. I've heard from for many years. When was the last time America won a war? Right.
Grenada.
Well, if you want to call that a war. World War II. The United, and this isn't a knock against the military. It's not. I'm not criticizing the military. Is the United States doesn't do well in wars in third world countries, and I don't even think that the United States could necessarily win a war against Ukraine, let alone Russia. But right now the emphasis is on economic sanctions and sanctioning Russia, and that is going to come back like a boomerang. It's already true. We're looking at new trade deals emerging. We're looking at nations saying, I don't want to end up like Putin and be sanctioned. And so new infrastructure being built around trade, new trade deals, people bypassing the dollar, because the dollar, the U.S. dollar, is being weaponized. And that's going to come back and hurt the voters. That's going to come back and hurt everyday Americans. And at some point, Americans are going to probably say, in droves, enough is enough, because it's hurting us more than it's hurting them. The Russians have grown very accustomed to living a Spartan lifestyle. We know that after the collapse in '92 in Russia, that the decade of the '90s was a disaster in terms of standard of living. And then, of course, over the last 10 years, Russia has been sanctioned left and right. It does not do anything. If anything, economic warfare leads to hot warfare.
That opens up a whole new conversation that we have to touch on, not today, however, but I'll just simply suggest that this realignment, this new world order, is not a pretty one. Because on one hand, it's Western democratic forces versus autocratic forces. And as we look, we see autocratic leaders winning elections. Stay tuned on France, incidentally. That's a very, very close election. On the other hand, the democratic forces are not united because democracies are being threatened. Democracies are not looking so pretty.
Yeah.
So what we'll have, are, a China-Russia coalition and a U.S.-Europe coalition, neither of which are going to be healthy for the planet?
Well, what's going to be healthy for the planet is a multipolar world. Is you know, the age of the unipolar, I think, is gone. And you know, this is a battle of new world orders. This is the, you know, the NATO, the DC, London, Berlin axis, however you want to define it, versus the China, Russia, Iranian axis, the Belt Road Initiative, the Silk Road 2.0, which has, you know, unbelievable potential for economic growth never before seen. That's what's going on, is this clash. And it's, you know, I'm sorry to go back to ancient history, but it's very much like the Peloponnesian War. You know, the very first thesis in history was written by Thucydides. That means that he gave the first secular analysis. He didn't look to the gods to describe what was going on. He said the Peloponnesian War happened because of the rise of Sparta and Athens' fear of it. And what we're seeing here is an Eastern axis, and Washington, D.C. is terrified of it, and they can't accept it. And if they don't accept it, I don't think good things are going to happen.
I'll only end by saying, and I've learned that whenever the Peloponnesian War comes up, it's time to stop. But Putin in this axis with Russia is a hot potato, and in so many ways, I think what you're seeing is the complete and utter loss of a superpower down to the status of virtually a worthless economy in the world order. Where are the natural allies? China's not a natural ally for Russia, and Russia's economy is less important to the planet than California's, which is not to say California isn't important to the global economy. It is to say that Russia is not a force.
Russia has some of the world's largest timber supply, some of the world's largest grain supply, the world's largest palladium and platinum supply, some of the world's largest gasoline and oil supply, and I think I've covered pretty good. But right there, I mean, they are a major exporter. Yes, down the line they will be an adversary with China. One could probably expect years down the road perhaps a conflict between the two of them. But in the meantime, it's a natural fit. And I'm just not buying the news coming out of the West that you know, Putin is a dying man. What people have to understand is the war in Ukraine is an existential threat to Russia. It is not an existential threat to NATO, and that speaks volumes in any fight.
Final word?
Final word.
You just described for me Turkey and Brazil when you described Russia. That does not make it a global superpower.
Multipolar.
Multipolar world. Okay. All right, we're done. Have a good have a good week, everybody.